Welcome to the Hindu Daily. We're diving straight into a really critical stack of sources today, starting with some of the biggest challenges facing India's governance and legal systems.
And look, there is no more urgent or, visible governance failure than the chronic winter air pollution crisis that just plagues Delhi year after year.
It's become this annual ritual, hasn't it? But it's so much more than that.
It's a structural failure of public health management, really. When the air quality index, the AQI, routinely surges past the 400 severe mark for weeks on end, we are looking at a sustained public health emergency.
And yet it continues to be treated as just a passing nuisance, something that'll just blow away when the weather changes.
Exactly. But it doesn't just blow away. The sources frame this not just as an environmental disaster, but as a severe economic drag.
The estimated cost is just staggering. What was it? $36.8 billion lost annually for India?
It is. That's equivalent to 1.36% of the national GDP. And that's all coming from medical expenses, lost productivity, and, tragically, from premature deaths.
And when you focus on the individual human impact, the numbers are even more stark.
They're devastating. I mean, prolonged exposure to Delhi's toxic air is estimated to reduce a person's life expectancy by up to 10 years.
10 years.
But the damage is far more intricate than just lung capacity. While respiratory diseases like COPD and asthma spike every winter, the really dangerous stuff is the ultrafine particulate matter, PM2.5.
Because it's so small.
It's so small it bypasses the body's defenses and gets right into the bloodstream.
And once it's in the bloodstream, what happens?
That's where it gets really scary. It means increased systemic inflammation that raises the risk of, acute cardiovascular events. We're talking heart attacks and strokes.
But the research is pointing to even more, isn't it?
It is. There are growing links to cognitive decline and, bizarrely, to disruptions in the immune system, potentially triggering or worsening autoimmune conditions like rheumatoid arthritis and lupus. The air is literally attacking the entire body.
Okay, so let's unpack why this specific challenge is labeled a wicked problem.
It's the perfect storm of unfavorable conditions. First, you have the geographical trap.
Right. Delhi sits in a basin, and the Aravalli Hills to the southwest restrict the airflow that would normally flush the pollutants out.
That geographical confinement is then amplified by a meteorological factor that's unique to winter: temperature inversion.
So instead of the air on the ground rising, it gets trapped.
It gets trapped under a layer of warmer air higher up. This lid, combined with low wind speeds, locks pollutants near the surface. It effectively turns the capital into what one source calls a bowl of poison.
And then on top of that, we layer on all the man-made factors.
All 3.3 crore registered vehicles adding nitrogen oxides. Then you have the unregulated construction activity, which is a massive contributor, about 27% of PM2.5 emissions.
And of course, the annual catastrophe of stubble burning in Punjab and Haryana, which persists despite subsidies for alternatives.
It's a catastrophe of collective action failure. But the source points out a rare and maybe essential political opportunity right now. For once, many of the key governing bodies, Delhi, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, and the central government, are politically aligned.
So, in theory, that should end years of bureaucratic finger-pointing that's always derailed real cleanup efforts.
In theory, yes. It could enable a genuine unified airshed management plan. And when we look globally, we don't have to guess what works. We have blueprints.
Like London's ULEZ, the ultra-low emission zone.
Exactly. Charging older, more polluting vehicles to enter the city, it rapidly changed the fleet. Or you look at Los Angeles, once famous for its smog, which adopted the world's strictest vehicle emission standards.
But the most relevant example has to be Beijing.
I think so. They faced a similar apocalypse a decade ago. Their multi-year action plan was aggressive, relocating polluting industries, banning coal for heating, huge investments in monitoring.
And the result?
A massive 35% drop in PM2.5 levels in just 5 years. The technology and the policy prescriptions exist. The question for Delhi, as the analysis concludes, is whether the political will is there to finally see it through.
Moving now from the air we breathe to the legal frameworks protecting our most vulnerable citizens. Let's look at a crucial Supreme Court case that clarified the gender-neutral design of the POCSO Act.
This was a really vital legal interpretation. The case involved a woman accused of penetrative sexual assault against a minor boy.
And the defense tried to argue that Section 3 of the Act, which defines the offense, was gender-specific, that it only applied to male perpetrators.
Right, their whole argument was based on the fact that the text uses the pronoun he.
But the court rejected that. What was the reasoning?
Well, it rests on a cornerstone of Indian legal interpretation, Section 13(1) of the General Clauses Act of 1897.
Which is basically the default dictionary for interpreting laws.
Exactly. It states clearly that words importing the masculine gender shall be taken to include females unless the law explicitly says otherwise, and POCSO doesn't. So he legally includes she.
And beyond just that textual argument, the very definition of the offense in Section 3 makes a gender-specific reading illogical.
Absolutely. Section 3 doesn't just talk about penile penetration. It explicitly covers a wider range of acts: digital penetration, object penetration, oral penetration.
And also forcing a child to perform sexual acts.
Right, which are all acts that can clearly be committed by individuals of any gender.
It seems like a deliberate legislative choice, especially when you compare it with other laws.
It does. If you look at the new Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita provision on rape, the BNS, it specifies that a man commits rape against a woman. That's unambiguously gender-specific.
So the fact that POCSO avoids that restrictive language is intentional.
The court saw it as confirming the legislative intent for a broader scope. At the end of the day, the objective is to safeguard children, regardless of the perpetrator's sex.
So affirming this neutrality gives visibility and justice to all victims.
Precisely. It closes a potential legal blind spot and reinforces the principle that the protection of the child is paramount.
Shifting now to a completely different legal realm, one involving resources, ecology, and constitutional rights. Let's discuss the legal hoodwinking of Adivasis in the Hasdeo-Rand region.
This is a classic and tragic case where legality seems to triumph over justice. It's centered on Gatbara village.
Their community forest rights, their CFRs, were canceled after the land was allocated for a coal mine.
Right, the Parsa East and Kantabasan coal mine. And the really heartbreaking part is that lakhs of trees were felled and mining was fast-tracked while the matter was still sub judice, still pending in court.
And the sources emphasize that for the Adivasi communities, this isn't just about property. They describe their connection to the forest as a living relationship.
It's integral to their identity and culture. So the idea that you can just compensate this loss with money it's completely missing the point.
Which is why the judgment is so contested. What was the court's core reasoning?
Well, the Chhattisgarh High Court declared their CFR recognition void ab initio invalid from the very beginning.
On what grounds?
On the technicality that the land had already been diverted for mining clearance back in 2012.
But that ruling seems to ignore the entire purpose of the Forest Rights Act.
It fundamentally undermines it. This is the crucial legal critique. The court effectively ignored Section 4.7 of the FRA.
Remind us what that section says.
It states that once forest rights are recognized, they are free of all encumbrances. So if the state claimed the mining lease was an encumbrance, the government was legally obligated to remove that lease first.
Instead, they used the pre-existing lease to invalidate the rights themselves.
It's a legal catch-22 designed to perpetuate dispossession, and the procedural failures just compound the issue.
How so?
The court focused on technicalities, even though the Gatbara Gram Sabha, the village council, had clearly recorded its opposition before the clearance.
And there was a history of forged consents in the area, wasn't there?
Yes, in neighboring blocks.
Yeah.
That should have triggered much closer judicial scrutiny here, but it didn't.
So the result is a judicial act that ends up validating dispossession.
Exactly. Upholding CFRs empowers the Gram Sabha. It fulfills the constitutional promise of Adivasi self-determination, like we saw in the Nyamdiri verdict. This ruling does the opposite. The source calls it a judicial act of administrative legitimization. It turns the law against justice.
All right, moving to the political landscape, let's decode the landslide win for the NDA in the recent Bihar elections. The results were pretty stark.
They were definitive. The NDA secured 202 seats with 46.6% of the vote share, absolutely routing the Mahagathbandhan, the MGB, which only got 35 seats.
But the underlying vote shares tell a slightly different story.
They do. The RJD, within the MGB, still emerged as the single largest party by popular vote. So this suggests the NDA was just much more efficient at converting votes into seats.
And what was the key to that success?
A lot of it was built around the double-engine Sarkar narrative, the promise that having the same party at the state and central levels guarantees faster development.
And voters bought into that.
They really did. The sources highlight immense voter satisfaction. Nearly 3/4 of voters expressed approval of both the state and central government's performance.
What specific improvements were people pointing to?
It was very much focused on infrastructure and service delivery. More than 3/4 of voters said electricity availability had improved. 7 out of 10 cited better roads, and there was also positive perception around schools and drinking water.
But the sources stress that the real crucial driver, especially for one key demographic, was law and order.
Absolutely. The campaign successfully leveraged history. Nearly half the respondents felt law and order had improved, and the NDA effectively warned that an MGB victory would mean a return to the Jungle Raj era.
And that message really resonated with women voters.
Yes, who were a significant swing group. Welfare schemes targeting women alcohol prohibition, cycles for schoolgirls, the Jivika Didi self-help group scheme all solidified their support. For them, the fear of instability outweighed the MGB's promises.
So while the MGB did consolidate its core base of Yadis and Muslims,
It just failed to expand beyond that. The failure was in attracting non-committed voters and, crucially, the late deciders.
how many voters decided late?
The sources show 42% only made up their mind in the final days. And of that critical group, the NDA secured 47% of the vote compared to just 36% for the MGB. The confidence just wasn't there.
Let's transition now from politics to the profound questions of fundamental physics and time itself. We are diving into the quantum realm to discuss a surprising discovery about the energy cost of reading a quantum clock.
This is fascinating stuff. It really challenges our intuitive understanding of time and thermodynamics. Scientists explored timekeeping using a microscopic system called a double quantum dot, or DQD.
And how does that work?
In essence, the movement of a single electron from a source across two tiny quantum dots and into a drain that constitutes a single tick of this clock. It's timekeeping at the absolute smallest scale imaginable.
The problem here, though, is the relationship between time and entropy, right? The second law of thermodynamics.
Precisely. In our classical world, time flows forward because entropy or disorder always increases. You can't unscramble an egg. Classical clocks produce heat, they increase entropy as they tick, and that enforces the arrow of time.
But in a quantum realm, entropy is minimal. So a quantum clock could theoretically tick backward.
Even just for a moment, yes. So if the clockwork itself doesn't generate enough entropy to ensure time only flows forward, how do we get a stable, irreversible record of time passing?
That's the big question.
The researchers hypothesized that the irreversibility must come from the measurement process the moment you translate the quantum state into a classical readable record.
So they designed an experiment to measure two different costs, the cost of the clock ticking and the cost of observing it tick.
Exactly. They used a sensitive charge sensor to extract the classical time signal, and the finding was, well, seismic.
Oh, listen.
The entropic cost of just extracting those classical ticks, of reading the time, dwarfed the energy required to make the clock tick by 9 orders of magnitude.
9 orders of magnitude, so a
Right.
factor of 1,000,000,000.
A factor of 1,000,000,000. 1,000,000,000 times more energy is dissipated simply to find out what time it is than was used to create the time signal itself.
That is an unbelievable finding.
It reveals a profound insight. The dominant source of irreversibility, the process that ensures time flows forward, is not the quantum clockwork. It's the act of observation. The moment you force a quantum system to yield classical information, you pay a massive thermodynamic penalty.
So this suggests that the clear unidirectional flow of time we all experience might not be an inherent property of the microscopic universe.
It might be an emergent property that arises from the macroscopic process of information extraction, of just
Right.
looking.
And this has practical implications too, right, for things like atomic clocks or quantum computers.
Oh, absolutely. If the measurement system is the main source of inefficiency, then designing more thermodynamically efficient measurement systems is the key to building better atomic clocks and more stable quantum computers. It's a fundamental insight with very real-world applications.
Moving from the theory of time to the practicalities of treating human disease, let's look at the global precision medicine market and where India fits in.
Precision biotherapeutics really is the future of medicine. It's a shift in philosophy away from just managing symptoms towards designing therapies based on a patient's unique genetic or molecular profile.
So you're targeting the root cause of the illness with incredible specificity.
Exactly. Using revolutionary technologies like CRISPR gene editing, mRNA therapeutics, and AI-driven drug discovery to figure out what will work for a specific person.
And this is something India urgently needs.
It does. Non-communicable diseases, diabetes, heart disease, cancers now account for 65% of all deaths. And on top of that, India has immense genetic diversity.
Which means treatments developed for Western populations might not be as effective here.
Precisely. That's why programs like Indigen and Genome India, which are sequencing local populations, are so essential. The economic opportunity is also substantial. The global market is forecast to exceed $22 billion by 2027.
And India has the skilled workforce and cost advantages to be a major player.
It's perfectly positioned to be a hub for affordable precision therapies.
So what's holding it back? What are the challenges?
They're significant. First, there's the lack of a clear, coherent regulatory framework for these advanced therapies. That's a major bottleneck.
And I imagine cost and manufacturing are issues too.
Very much so. There is limited local manufacturing capacity, which drives up the cost and restricts access. And critically, without robust data protection rules, the ethical and privacy concerns around collecting all this genomic data are still unresolved.
Our next major area concerns policy and infrastructure, beginning with India's new Digital Governance Framework, the Digital Personal Data Protection Rules, 2025.
Yes, and the establishment of the Data Protection Board of India, or DPPI. This framework aims to harmonize how corporate entities, what they call data fiduciaries, handle our personal data.
So it's about reinforcing user rights, requiring informed consent, and mandating that companies delete our data after a certain period of inactivity.
Right. And for larger organizations, the obligations are even stricter. They need mandatory security audits, encryption, and a dedicated data protection officer.
There's also this idea of a consent manager service.
Yes, which will eventually allow users to centrally manage and revoke their data permissions across various platforms. It offers a level of control that we just don't have right now.
On the surface, this sounds like a massive step forward for privacy. But there's one part of the DPDP Act that has drawn furious opposition from transparency activists.
That would be the controversial amendment to the Right to Information Act, the RTI.
What exactly did they change?
They amended Section 8 and J of the RTI. Previously, this section let government bodies withhold personal information unless there was a clear overriding public interest in its disclosure. That public interest carve-out was the safety valve for transparency.
And the DPDP Act got rid of that public interest provision.
It removed it entirely. And activists see this as a massive blow to democratic transparency. It gives government agencies almost unimpeachable discretion to withhold information simply by classifying it as personal.
So how does this cripple the ability to hold power accountable in practice?
It paralyzes the ability to conduct social audits. Think about scrutinizing ration muster rolls to check for ghost beneficiaries or work order logbooks.
Things activists use to uncover corruption at the grassroots level.
Exactly. Under the old law, the public interest in preventing corruption superseded the personal information claim. Now, a government body can refuse to share those lists, claiming the names are personal data, effectively shielding misconduct from citizen scrutiny.
And this particular amendment was put into immediate force.
It was. Unlike other provisions with a long lead time, the government specifically invoked its power to enact this one right away, which shows you just how high a priority it was to reduce that specific avenue of transparency.
Let's shift gears from digital policy to physical infrastructure, looking at India's dependency risk in maritime trade and the case for domestic shipbuilding.
This is a massive hidden vulnerability for India. We are one of the world's largest importers of crucial commodities: oil, gas, coal.
And yet something like 85% of our maritime cargo is handled by foreign vessels.
Right, an $85 billion requirement handled by foreign ships. It poses a major economic risk in the event of global disruptions or geopolitical friction.
And when you look at the global shipbuilding picture, India is barely a player.
We account for a mere 0.5% of the market. China, Korea, and Japan control 93%. It's a huge disparity.
So what's being done to reverse this?
The government has launched some substantial initiatives, including a financial package of 70,000 crore rupees, with the specific aim of getting India into the global top 5 by 2047.
And we're already seeing the impact through major commitments.
We are. PSU oil and gas companies have placed 59 shipbuilding orders worth nearly 48,000 crore rupees, which ensures a domestic pipeline of demand.
And there's also a push for sustainability.
Yes, with the Green Tug Transition Program, aiming for 100 eco-friendly tugboats by 2040. It's a classic example of using state demand to trigger private sector growth.
Continuing that infrastructure focus, let's analyze how our ports are currently functioning as a drag-ahead hidden export tax on India's ambition to be a major agri exporter.
It's a really systemic problem. Over 80% of India's agricultural exports rely on port efficiency. But when ports are inefficient, those delays and losses translate directly into costs for farmers.
which makes Indian produce less competitive on the global market.
Exactly. The first issue is cargo contamination from outdated handling. Second is the severe spoilage risk for perishables because of long birthing delays and a lack of dedicated agribirths.
And the third problem is the fractured logistics chain.
Right. Critical cold storage and warehousing facilities are often located 15 or more kilometers away from the terminals, which just inflates costs and transit time.
So the reform agenda has to be about targeted investment.
Yes. Investment in pre-cooling, irradiation, and temperature-controlled storage could cut post-harvest losses by 30 to 40%.
But the most crucial reform seems procedural.
It is. It's about integrating the regulatory agencies, FSSAI, plant quarantine, customs, and physically locating them within the port premises. That would dramatically cut down on the paperwork and inspection time that can kill an export order.
Our final thematic section looks at energy transitions, first with a global view, focusing on the Czech Republic's big bet on nuclear power.
They've unveiled an ambitious $19 billion plan to drastically increase their nuclear output. They're aiming for nuclear to cover between 50 and 60% of their electricity by 2050.
And this is all about phasing out coal while meeting soaring demand from data centers and electric vehicles.
Exactly. They just awarded a big contract to South Korea's KHNP for 2 new reactors at the Dukovany plant, with options for more. It's a comprehensive, long-term national commitment.
And this reflects a broader shift across the European Union.
It does. The EU has now included nuclear in its sustainable financing system, which is a massive boost. We're seeing countries like Belgium and Sweden scrapping their old phase-out plans.
And Poland is joining the coalition of nuclear-friendly nations.
It's a major policy turnaround across the continent, a recognition that nuclear is probably necessary to meet decarbonization goals while keeping the lights on.
But there is still some notable resistance.
That would be Austria. They abandoned nuclear power after Chernobyl in 1986 and remain highly skeptical. They've already rejected the Czech modular reactor plan, which highlights that these decisions are still weighted by history and local politics.
That point about local political friction takes us straight to our final article, the paradox of clean energy development in India. Specifically, the conflict around a floating solar project on the Pinchet Dam reservoir.
Right. This involves a planned 155 MW floating solar project, part of India's push to meet its COP26 targets. But while the national goal is clean energy, the project is generating intense local conflict.
Nearly 2,500 fisherfolk and villagers from Jharkhand and West Bengal are protesting. They're calling it a death sentence for their livelihoods.
They are. They're losing access to the reservoir for fishing, which is a major source of income, and critical grazing lands along the banks for their livestock. They rely on that water for everything.
And this conflict has a deep historical root, which is fueling the anger.
It does. The protesters cite unfair displacement from the dam's original construction in the 1950s. They feel they already sacrificed their land, their forest, their water once, and are now being asked to do it again without any consultation.
This presents a real development paradox. Local leaders support clean energy, but not at the cost of local livelihood.
That's the key. This tension reveals a systemic issue. Solar projects are land-intensive, and in land-scarce, densely populated areas, this inevitably leads to conflict.
And the data shows this is a pattern, not an isolated incident.
A study cited in the source found that 48% of conflicts in renewable energy projects happen on common lands areas used by indigenous communities that are easy targets for state acquisition. And in 45% of cases, there was no consultation.
So the big takeaway here is that the renewable energy transition can't afford to repeat the social land conflicts of the fossil fuel era.
Absolutely. The necessity of consulting local communities at the planning stage is paramount. Failure to get social buy-in not only harms communities, but creates massive project risk. Social justice has to be a prerequisite for sustainable energy success.
As we close out this deep dive, there's a really interesting thread that connects almost everything we've discussed today.
And that's the concept of measurement and cost.
Right. We started with the fundamental physics of timekeeping, where the arrow of time is defined by a colossal entropic cost 1 billion times more energy just to read the time than to create it.
And then we saw the immense, painful social costs of economic progress. Adivasi rights in Hasdeo Rand revoked by legal technicality, fisherfolk at Pinchet Dam threatened, all for resources or decarbonization.
And we detailed the systemic economic cost of inefficient governance, whether it's the $36.8 billion burden of Delhi's air crisis or the hidden export tax that inefficient ports levy on India's farmers.
So the question to carry forward is this. To what extent is true national progress defined less by what we build and more by what we are willing to measure and ultimately pay in terms of energy, social justice, and the consistent application of political will?
Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.